Ithinar's Bloom by H. Jane Harrington. Sibylline Enthrallment. Chapter 37. Guarded Prophecy. I've never sought prophecy. Once heard, you tend to chase it on the very path you take to avoid it. Master Kezias. They rode into Arjo, nursing cautious nerves. Although the mages had steered clear, any shadow might belch up a cloak of nasty in an unguarded moment. The zealots were either unaware of Von's location or biding their time. Either way, Keir didn't like it. She much preferred to face an enemy head-on, rather than wait for the unknown. She could not be sure that the keepers hadn't set the tentacle creature, but it was unlikely. They were thoroughly obsessed with order. Whatever that Kaya had been, it was definitely a creature of chaos. Arjo was much like the other large coastal towns, with docks and harbor businesses built on stilts to account for the dramatic tides that changed constantly throughout the day. It was a briny, stinkfish jumble of plank, rope, and rigging. The northern city was increasingly modern and decreasingly rustic, accommodating the fine tastes of the higher classes, where establishments hovered on wind-powered engines rather than on stilts. Arjo was easy to navigate, and Malachar led them directly to Tavern Row without needing to ask directions. He reined up outside an unremarkable fisherman's tavern and made brief eye contact with Keir, who nodded approval. She was tasked with bartering for a boat, and this place looked just shady enough to provide refuge for a trade dealer. As the foursome stepped onto the boardwalk, a loud noise drew their attention down the street. An outlandish vehicle clunked their way, retching a vulgar, chuffing rumble. It was shaped something like a wagon, but lacked the horses to pull it. It had 4 wheels and 2 separate seats. A foppish gentleman sat in one, peering through googly-lensed spectacles that clung to his head like a petrified tree frog riding a limb in a hurricane. He pushed and pulled on 2 long tillers, alternating stride. His jerky motions reminded Keir of a crone trying to row a rocking chair through the dust. The underbelly of the clunker was eaten up by a huge, disagreeable engine. "What in damnation is that?" Keir gawked. "One of those newfangled skiffs. I saw one while on duty in Havenland. It doesn't use a scrap of magic, if you can believe that," Malachar replied. "Truly? What powers it, then?" Von asked. He was as captivated as a kitten in a birdcage. "Water, but not water magic. It's run on steam. In Havenland, some university professors are using mechanology rather than magic," Malachar explained. "Mechanology? Well, it's all the rage in Havenland, but the mages are none too thrilled with it. It's the study of why and how things work the way they do. It attaches rules to the nature of the world. Mechanologists use gears and contraptions to interact with mechanisms, and the outcome is in things like that skiff." "Why would anyone desire a skiff that was not magically powered? What is the point of such a thing?" Scilio asked, distastefully wrinkling his nose. Malachar shrugged. "Maybe men are growing bored with the world and need hobbies to occupy their time." Keir swore she could see stars dancing in Von's dreamy-eyed gaze as he stared at the passing vehicle. "Well, I think it's fascinating. I'd like to steer one," Von said. "Something that moves entirely on its own, using only the elements of the earth around it? That's not so different from magic when you think about it." "But," Scilio asked hesitantly, "if men continue inventing new non-magical devices, might not magic itself become obsolete? The gods gave us our means of survival. So what's the point of magic if we can do the same thing without it?" No one spoke, and Keir knew that they were all considering the question seriously. She didn't know how to respond, so she chose silence and looking like a fool over opening her mouth and proving herself such. She didn't know diddly of mechanisms, and Scilio's thinking sounded downright logical to her mind. Von spoke first. "Then perhaps magic has outlived its usefulness. Or will in time, as men grow smarter." Malachar shook his head warily. "Don't let the mages hear you say that. They're the so-called keepers of magic. They wouldn't abide such talk." Von shrugged. "Can they hate me more?" "Let's move this off the street," Keir warned. Malachar concurred and led them through swinging tavern doors. Keir paused on the boardwalk, feeling eyes boring into her back. A sweet, smoky aroma pleasured her nostrils, and she turned around to scan the area. A cloaked man, his arms crossed, leaned against a building at the far end of the street. His black cloak was drawn back to reveal twin swords at his hip. He was staring at Keir under the wide brim of his hat, and a cigar dangled from his grin. The man looked familiar, but she could not place him. Kier was about to mosey over and hoo-er-you him when Malachar poked his head over the swinging door. "Coming?" Kier glanced at Malachar and nodded a brief affirmation. "I'll be right along." She turned back toward the stranger, but he was gone. He left a trail as clear as a fart in a windstorm. Kier scanned the street, puzzled. As she turned back to the tavern, the lingering scent of cigar smoke hung on the air. It couldn't have been him. He'd been standing too far away. She furrowed her brow and shook her head as she pushed through the doors. The skeptical part of her wondered if she'd really seen him at all. The men were already seated at a small private table, engaged over a deck of cards. Kier made her way to the bar to establish herself as a client to any dealer that might be wanting to talk trade. The barmaster, drawing a mug, seemed to recognize Kier's need. "If it's goods and services you're looking for, I'm your man," he stated. Kier began her dealings, and within minutes negotiations were concluded. She pulled a chair to the table where the men played their Ithinar anti-game. They finished their hand, and Scilio took the pot. "We're good," Kier commented casually. "Ready on the morrow." She tapped her finger on the table to join in. Scilio dealt another hand, and they examined their cards. "What type of vessel?" Malachar asked, drawing two. "Small, 5-seater, dual magic engine. Water-powered with windburst," Kier said as she made her play. "It would be a decent watercraft with plenty of giddy-up." The windburst was a handy feature that allowed for short stints of added speed should an emergency arise. Traded the horses straight up. "Will the captain be a good fighter? Our last skiff driver didn't last so long in combat," Vaughn said, passing his turn. Scilio smiled. "Oh, I think he'll do just fine. I've seen him gut a mage all by himself, even after being pinned against a skiff." Vaughn looked up from his cards with tentative elation. "I'm going to man the helm?" The three guardians flashed grins at his boyish enthusiasm. "I've never steered a boat before." "Not much to it," Kier told him. "You don't need magic. The boat runs on its own. You just point it in one direction and go." "Sounds like fun, but why me?" he asked as Scilio revealed his winning hand, once again claiming the pot. "'Cause we'll be too busy guarding your neck," Malachar said, tossing his cards in. After an hour of gaming and a modest meal that was akin to fine dining compared to Scilio's fare, the group decided to find a room. Their boat would not be ready until the following day, so they were forced to spend one night in Arjo. To keep Vaughn away from people as much as possible, they had agreed to turn in early. Malachar and Vaughn were already on the boardwalk when Kier realized that Scilio was not behind her. She made her way across the room to where he was, leaning suavely against a post and engaged in friendly conversation with two buxom barmaids. Kier cleared her throat, but he ignored her, continuing an exaggerated story that seemed to have the women's rapt attention. Kier, a being of little patience, grabbed him by the folds of his white cape and told the women gruffly, "Hands off, he's mine." She dragged him outside and shoved him into the street. "I beg your pardon. You have the manners of a scapegrace," Scilio huffed as he straightened his cloak. "Let's go, Ponytail. We have a job to do. Think with your other brain once in a while." Scilio muttered something under his breath, then mounted gracefully. Glimpsing the two barmaids peering out the window at him, he waved and bowed in an ostentatious display, and galloped after the group. The guardians found a suitable inn, and procured a room with 4 single beds. When they had settled in, Malachar posted himself at the window. Kier sat in a chair alongside the door, polishing her short sword and listening to the footsteps of patrons passing in the halls. Scilio sat on his bed, looking droopier than a pecker at an abstinence rally. "Why must I refrain from enjoying the spoils of Arjo?" Scilio sulked. "We shall be in town for an entire evening. After endless weeks spent in the presence of leather, dirt, and otherwise masculine company, no offense, Kier, I long for the soft charms of a gentlewoman, one who appreciates my many talents." Vaughn smiled apologetically. "The time will come, Toma. Very soon we'll be in safer territory." "Tell you what, little brother," Malachar offered. "When His Majesty rests safely in his chambers in High Imperia, surrounded by palace guards and thick walls, I will buy you as many wenches as you can fit in your bed." Scilio's eyes widened. "For that promise, big brother, I would be willing to wait. And keep in mind, guardian quarters promise exceedingly ample beds indeed." Kier rolled her eyes at Malachar. "Gods, but don't encourage him." Vaughn laughed. "The challenge is living long enough to reap the reward, Toma. Stay focused on the task at hand, namely protecting me, and don't go dying on us. Agreed?" Scilio bowed playfully. "I accept. I doubt there are many ladies of pleasure in the heavens anyway. What need have I to venture there?" He turned to Malachar. "Don't forget it, my good man. I will hold you to that promise." Malachar raised his arm across his chest in salute. "On my honor as a guardian." Kier huffed, wondering why she had to put up with so much testosterone. At sunup, the group stepped into the briny, humid morning air. Kier considered removing her duster and rolling up her sleeves, but decided against it, preferring to keep her vambrace hidden from view, lest someone recognize the symbol. She blinked her eyes hard against the sting of strain. She had entertained another lousy night, plagued with grisly dreams. These lately weren't the typical sleep memories, but they were horrifying still. The latest round of nightmares had revolved around Vaughn specifically. They teased her with images of his mutilated body. Rather than fight the freak show, she'd chosen to forego sleep. The fatigue was making her grumpy. "Services this morning at Arjo Grand Temple," a high-pitched voice spoke beside Kier. She glanced down to see a stout little bespectacled man, only a few inches taller than her waistline, holding a pamphlet out toward her. "No thanks," she said, but the man thrust the paper into her hand anyway. "No gods-fearing traveler should miss it. Arjo Grand is the oldest standing shrine in Mercaria, dating pre-raising, and boasts the largest collection of prophecies in the known world." "Not interested," Kier growled against her rising ire. "It also has the grandest architecture you'll find outside of High Imperia. The priests here deliver powerful sermons, worthy of the gods' praise, sister. I promise all your sins will be washed away upon entrance." The man peered over his spectacles and looked at Kier's attire up and down, then grimaced. "And you look as though you have many a sin in need of cleansing." Kier dropped the pamphlet and seized the shrimpy cuss by the collar. She hauled him into the air, thrusting him against a post. "Listen here, you little—" Now, Kier. No need to bother the locals." Vaughn swept in and urged her to release the man. He ushered the missionary away from Kier, who glared menacingly. The man hurried down the street in a huff, glancing back every few steps to ensure that she wasn't going to chase him down. "Thought she wanted to avoid attracting attention," Malachar muttered, scanning the street to ensure that nobody was watching them. "Sorry," Kier mumbled. "I just hate those damn zealots." Vaughn knelt and plucked the pamphlet from the ground. "Arjo Grand Temple, anciently known as Sarastar Shrine," he read aloud. "I think I've heard that name somewhere before." Malachar's head shot up. "What did you say?" "Arjo Grand Temple?" "No, did you say Sarastar?" Malachar asked. Vaughn looked at the paper, then nodded. "Sarastar, home to over 60,000 prophecies," he read. "Interesting," Malachar remarked. "When I was in Galvatine's chamber on duty, I heard him talking about Sarastar. He said the prophecy was housed there." "Of course, it claims to safeguard thousands of them," Scilio pointed to the pamphlet in Vaughn's hand. "But the one he mentioned specifically," Malachar said, "was the bringer of chaos." Vaughn's face paled. "It's here?" A hush settled on the group. "Let's find an open tavern," Kier breathed. "I think I need to wash the morning down." When they had settled antsy rumps into their seats, Malachar cast a sound barrier to ensure privacy. As they were the only patrons of the establishment, their voices would carry easily, and the information that they were about to discuss was especially sensitive. "I got the impression from Galvatine that there's more to this prophecy than we know. The Moonless Night and Tarnavarian's role," Vaughn began. "Galvatine made mentions of these elements, but he was vague regarding the details. Perhaps there's some additional information that I require. Galvatine's gone through a lot of trouble over the years, and maybe he's right. Maybe I will be the Chaos Bringer. Or maybe I can prevent it," Vaughn said. "The only way to know would be to read the actual prophecy," Malachar finished. Vaughn stared at his goblet. The wheels in his head were turning so hard, Kier could almost see smoke coming out his ears. "What if it's true?" Vaughn said, almost to himself. "I can't rain destruction upon the world. I just can't. I would rather—" He never finished the path of that thought, but Kier had an inkling of where it was leading him. Malachar stared at him silently, and Scilio seemed lost in pondering. "Look, Vaughn, you can't know whether or not you're the so-called Chaos Bringer," Kier told him. "But it's been my experience that a man has to blaze his own trail. Nothing's written that can't be changed, otherwise prophecy would be pretty pointless. I know you're a good person, and I know you'll be a great king. Don't let someone else write your destiny. Prophecy be damned. I believe in you." Vaughn seemed sincerely touched by her speech. She wished it had been more eloquent, but then she didn't have Scilio's gift for prose. "You're right, Kier. You're right, and yet—" Vaughn paused. "I must know. If I'm prepared for the potential, I can find a way to avoid it. I can change it. You mean to read the prophecy for yourself, Malachar surmised. Vaughn looked at each of his guardians firmly. I do. I must find it and interpret it. Then, perhaps my path will become pellucid. Will you help me? We're your guardians. Where else would we be? Malachar answered. Right. Then we'll need a plan. We have to figure out where the prophecies are kept, get in unnoticed, snatch the correct scroll, escape undetected, and make our getaway. Under the noses of countless guards, priests, and possibly even shadow mages. That doesn't sound too difficult, Skilios said drolly. Sure, Kier said through a lopsided grin. Nothing like waltzing right into the hands of an enemy to start the day off, right? So, how do we find the prophecy room and how do we break in? Vaughn asked. The regular guard is tasked with all sentry duty in the temples, Malachar said. I was one of the sentries in the Citadel and would occasionally guard their prophecy room. Honestly, it was a monkey's job. That is, no one was ever fool enough to try to break in, and we all considered it easy duty. Well, that's good. Then it shouldn't be a problem to break in here, right? If they don't expect us fools, Kier asked. Malachar shrugged. Depends on how lax the sentries and their superiors are. Most officers in the temples are lazy as hell because they can be. They do things right under the noses of the priests because the priests have no authority to dismiss them. I knew several captains who fancied ladies of pleasure. They would bring their wenches right through the back door, different one each night. Suddenly, Skilios' eyes brightened, and he grinned so wide Kier thought she could see his brains. I have an idea, he said, eyeing her with delicious mischief. Kier swallowed. Why do I have the feeling that I'm not going to like this?